It was a busy Tuesday morning when Robert opened the door to his small mechanic shop, the familiar sound of the bell chiming as the shop came to life. The smell of motor oil and grease filled the air, a scent Robert had grown used to over the years. His hands were calloused, his clothes stained with the signs of hard work. The small family-owned shop was his pride and joy. It wasn't much, but it was his. He had built it from the ground up, working long hours and often going without much sleep to make ends meet. Despite the constant struggle, he loved his work. That morning, he was in the middle of making his coffee when he heard the rumble of a motorcycle engine outside. It wasn't the usual sound of a bike cruising by, though. This was louder, deeper, more menacing. Robert's curiosity peaked as the engine drew closer, and soon the sound stopped right outside his shop. He took a quick glance out of the window, wondering who the rider was. What he saw caught him off guard. A massive black Harley-Davidson, the kind of bike you only saw in movies or documentaries about gangs. It wasn't just any bike. It was the kind of bike that demanded attention, with heavy leather patches, chrome accents, and a design that screamed power. Before Robert could process it, the rider swung off the bike, his boots hitting the pavement with a solid thud. The man was tall and built like a tank, his face weathered but strong with a dark beard that matched his long hair. He wore a leather jacket adorned with the iconic Hells Angels logo, a symbol that made most people wary. The Hells Angels were a notorious motorcycle club, known for their strong presence and their members who weren't afraid to stand their ground. The man didn't look like he was in a hurry, but his face was serious. He walked towards the entrance of the shop, the heavy thuds of his boots making the ground vibrate. Robert wiped his hands on a rag and stood from behind the counter, instinctively bracing himself. The man had the kind of presence that demanded attention. "Hey, buddy," the man said with a deep voice, his eyes scanning the shop. "Got a problem with my bike." "Think you can fix it?" Robert nodded. "Sure, we can take a look." "What's going on with it?" The biker pointed to his bike. "It won't start. Looks like the engine's acting up and I can't figure it out. Been on the road all day. I need it fixed." Robert stepped outside and took a closer look at the Harley. The first thing he noticed was that the bike had been through a lot. Scratches on the body, dirt caked into the rims, and the signs of wear and tear that came from years of riding hard. But there was something else about it, something that suggested the owner didn't just care about it but relied on it for his life. He wasn't just a biker. He was someone who depended on that bike to keep him going. "I'll take a look," Robert said, leading the biker into the shop. He motioned for Jason, one of his best mechanics, to come over and take a look. Jason had worked with Robert for several years and knew the ins and outs of motorcycles better than anyone. Jason was quiet as he approached the bike, his eyes scanning every part of it. "Looks like the fuel pump's shot," he said after a few moments. "This isn't something we can fix in a few minutes. It's going to take a bit longer to figure out the issue." The biker's expression didn't change. "How long are we talking?" he asked, his voice firm but calm. Jason shrugged, not wanting to make any promises he couldn't keep. "Could be a couple of hours. It's not an easy fix, but we'll get it done." The biker looked at Robert, then back at his bike. "All right, I'll wait, but I don't have all day," Robert nodded. "We'll get it done as fast as we can." For the next few hours, Jason worked steadily on the bike, pulling it apart piece by piece. The shop was quiet except for the soft clinks of tools and the low hum of the radio in the background. Robert kept an eye on the biker who had taken a seat by the counter. He seemed calm, but there was a restlessness in the way he tapped his fingers on the table. Robert could sense the tension in the air. This wasn't just a regular customer. This was someone who expected things to be done right and quickly. The clock ticked away and the minutes turned into hours. Jason was still deep into the bike's engine, tracing the wiring and testing the fuel system. The shop was used to these kinds of jobs, but this one felt different. The pressure was building, and Robert knew they couldn't afford to fail. He glanced over at the biker who hadn't moved from his spot, his eyes still fixed on the bike. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jason let out a breath of relief. "I think I've got it," he said. "The wiring was the issue. It's fixed now." Robert wiped his hands on a rag and walked over to the biker. "We're good to go. The bike should run just fine now." The biker stood up, his gaze sharp. He walked over to his bike, his fingers lightly brushing against the handlebars. He looked over the repair, inspecting the work done. Robert held his breath, unsure of what the biker would say next. Well, the biker said, turning to face Robert and Jason. You guys did a decent job. I'll give you that. Robert smiled, relieved that the job had been completed to the biker's satisfaction. Glad we could help, he said, trying to keep the mood light. But before he could say anything else, the biker's expression shifted. He pulled out his wallet and began counting bills. I need to talk to you, he said, looking directly at Robert. I'll be back in a minute. Robert felt a chill run down his spine. What did the biker mean? Had they done something wrong? He watched as the biker walked out the door, leaving Robert and Jason to exchange worried glances. A few moments later, the biker returned, but this time, there was a change in the atmosphere. He walked directly up to Robert, his face stern. Listen, man, I'm not happy about how long it took. You made me wait too long. I don't appreciate that. Robert felt his stomach drop. I'm sorry about the wait, he said quickly. We're a small shop and we do our best to get things done quickly, but we also want to make sure the job is done right. The biker shook his head, frustration clear on his face. You don't get it. I don't have time for this. I came here because you seemed like you knew what you were doing, but you didn't deliver. Jason took a step forward, trying to ease the tension. We did the best we could. It wasn't an easy fix, but it's all set now. The biker didn't say anything for a moment. Instead, he pulled out a few bills from his wallet and slapped them on the counter. I'm done here. You guys don't know how to run a business. Consider this your payment. Don't bother calling me again. With that, he stormed out of the shop, leaving Robert and Jason standing in stunned silence. The bell above the door jingled as it closed, and the sound of the bike's engine roared back to life. Robert stood there for a long moment, trying to process what had just happened. Jason was the first to speak. What just happened? He asked, his voice a mixture of disbelief and confusion. I don't know, Robert replied. I thought we did everything right. But I guess it wasn't enough for him. They both stood there looking at the cash left on the counter. Robert felt a sinking feeling in his chest. The biker's words had stung, and the way he had left without so much as a goodbye left a bitter taste in Robert's mouth. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the respect. He had tried to do the right thing, but it felt like nothing was ever enough. What Robert didn't know was that this encounter wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something that would change everything for him and his shop. The next morning, after the unexpected turn of events at the shop, things felt different. The mechanic who had worked tirelessly for years at the same small auto repair shop wasn't sure what to expect next. He had always been someone who kept his head down, focused on his work, and rarely got involved in drama. But now, standing on the other side of his boss's anger and rejection, things were unclear. It was almost surreal to think about what had just happened. His mind kept replaying the moment when his boss had fired him, his words cutting through the air like a sharp knife. The anger, the disbelief, it had all happened so quickly. But what really stung was the fact that he had been let go for doing what he thought was right. All he did was fix a bike, help someone who needed it. Was that so wrong? The mechanic walked slowly back to his small apartment, his thoughts racing. The streets were quieter now, early in the morning with only the occasional car passing by. He couldn't help but feel a little lost. His whole life had been spent working on bikes and cars, learning the trade from his father, who had been a mechanic as well. It was all he knew. And now, just like that, it was gone. He tried to brush it off, telling himself that he would find another job, but deep down, he knew it wasn't going to be that simple. As he walked into his apartment, he tossed his tools down onto the table. The familiar scent of old oil and grease filled the air, but today it felt different. It felt heavier. He needed a moment to collect himself, to think about what his next step would be. He sat down on his worn-out couch and stared at the floor, lost in thought. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. He picked it up, not expecting much, but when he saw the name on the screen, his heart skipped a beat. It was the same man from the day before, the Hell's Angel biker who had brought his motorcycle into the shop. The mechanic hesitated for a moment before answering, his mind still clouded by everything that had happened. Hello? Hey, it's me, the guy with the bike. You're probably surprised to hear from me, the voice on the other end of the phone said, but I wanted to check in. Are you okay? The mechanic blinked, surprised by the concern in the man's voice. Yeah, I'm fine, just still processing everything that happened yesterday. I can imagine, the biker replied. I wanted to say I'm sorry about what happened. I don't know what went down, but I can tell you one thing. You did nothing wrong by fixing my bike. You helped me out and you should have been treated better than that. The mechanic didn't know how to respond. He wasn't used to people standing up for him, especially not someone like the biker. Thanks, he said quietly. But there's not much I can do about it now. I got fired. The biker paused for a moment before speaking again. Look, I don't know what your plans are, but I'm going to be straight with you. We need someone like you. You've got the skills and you don't let a reputation stop you from doing what's right. I'd like to offer you something. The mechanic raised an eyebrow, intrigued but still unsure. Offer me something? What do you mean? The biker continued. I run a few bike shops in the area. I could use a mechanic who knows what they're doing. I'm not talking about just another shop job. I'm talking about being part of something different. We have our own crew, and we value loyalty and skill. If you're interested, you can join us. We're not the typical business, but we get things done and we do it right. The mechanic sat up straighter, his curiosity piqued. He hadn't expected something like this. You want me to work for you? Exactly, the biker replied. You're not just another mechanic. You've got something special and I want you on my team. You're free to make your own decisions, but think about it. You wouldn't have to deal with people who don't appreciate you. You'd have a place where your skills are respected. The mechanic was silent for a few moments. It was an offer that seemed almost too good to be true. But the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. He had just been fired for doing the right thing. And now here was someone offering him a new path. A path where he could be himself. Where his abilities would be recognized. It was tempting, and part of him wanted to say yes right away. But another part of him hesitated. He had always been cautious, never one to rush into things without thinking them through. He knew what it was like to be part of a group with a reputation, and the Hells Angels weren't exactly known for their clean image. He didn't want to get involved in something that might bring trouble down the road. Still, he couldn't deny that the offer was enticing. I don't know, the mechanic said slowly. It sounds like a big decision. I'm not sure if I'm ready to dive into something like that. The biker's tone softened. Take your time, man. I'm not trying to rush you, but don't let fear of the unknown stop you from making a choice that could change everything for you. This isn't about joining a gang. It's about being part of a team that values hard work and loyalty. You'll have the chance to make your own future. The mechanic thought about the life he had been living before, working for someone who didn't understand his worth, dealing with customers who treated him like just another worker. He had always dreamed of being more than that, of having his skills recognized, of being able to make a real difference. Maybe this was his chance. I'll think about it, he said finally, still uncertain but intrigued by the possibility. The biker gave a low chuckle. Take all the time you need. But don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't come around every day. As the call ended, the mechanic sat there staring at his phone for a few moments. He was still trying to wrap his head around everything that had happened. A part of him was excited by the idea of working with the Hells Angels, but another part of him felt nervous about the unknown. Was he really ready to leave behind everything he knew, or was this the kind of opportunity he had been waiting for? He decided to take the day to think things through. The decision wasn't one he could make lightly. He needed to be sure that this was the right move for him. But as he sat there, he realized that he had already made up his mind. The offer from the biker wasn't just a job offer. It was a chance to be part of something bigger, something that could change his life in ways he never imagined. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he had a future worth fighting for. The next morning, he called the biker back. His mind was made up. I'm in, he said, his voice firm and sure. The biker's response was simple but full of meaning. Good choice. I knew you'd come around. And with that, the mechanic's life was set on a new path. He wasn't sure where it would take him, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone hold him back again. He was ready to prove his worth and take on the challenges ahead. The future was wide open and he was ready to ride it. The following day, George arrived at his shop early, determined to carry on with his work despite what had happened the day before. It wasn't the first time he'd faced a difficult customer, and he wasn't about to let one bad experience stop him. He had built this business from the ground up, and he wasn't going to let a threat from a motorcycle club member take it all away. As George opened the garage doors and started sorting through the tools, he couldn't help but think about what had happened with the Hells Angel the day before. The situation had caught him off guard. All he'd done was try to do his job and stand up for himself when things got tense. but somehow that had been enough to get him fired. Even though he'd fixed the man's bike and done everything right, he had expected that the Hells Angel would be upset at the extra time it took to fix the bike, but he hadn't anticipated that the man would go so far as to refuse payment and then threaten his business. That part had really shaken him. The worst part was George had done nothing wrong. He was simply being honest and doing the work to the best of his ability. It wasn't right and it didn't seem fair. But as the day went on, something began to happen that George hadn't expected. One by one, customers started showing up at his shop. They were regulars, people who had been coming to George for years, and they weren't there for just a simple repair. They were there to offer their support. "Hey, George, I heard about what happened yesterday," one of the customers said as he walked in, a familiar face. "I just wanted to say I've been coming here for years and I'm not going anywhere. I've always trusted you with my bike and that's not going to change." George smiled, genuinely touched by the gesture. "Thanks, I appreciate that," he said, his voice a little rough. "I didn't expect things to turn out like this." The customer shook his head. "You did the right thing. That guy had no business treating you like that. I don't care who he is or what patch he wears. You've been nothing but fair to me and I'm sticking with you." Another customer, a woman who had brought her car in for regular maintenance, also showed up with the same message of support. "I just wanted to let you know I heard about what happened and I'm backing you up," she said as she handed George a few $100s for a job that was already done. "If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know." George was stunned. He had never expected this kind of response. The support wasn't just about the business. It was about the respect people had for him as a person. The Hells Angel might have been trying to scare him, but it seemed like the community was rallying around him, proving that the reputation he had built over the years was stronger than any threat. It wasn't just a few people either. The longer George worked in the shop that day, the more customers came in. Many of them had heard about what had happened from word of mouth. They came in with their bikes, with their cars, or just to check in on him. Each one of them had a story of their own about how George had helped them, or how they trusted him with their vehicles. The messages were all the same. "You're a good man, George. You've earned our trust and we're not going anywhere." By the time George broke for lunch, he was overwhelmed by the outpouring of support. The shop had been busy with customers who wanted to show that they had his back. It was clear that the Hells Angels threat had done nothing to diminish George's standing in the community. If anything, it seemed to have had the opposite effect. People weren't afraid of the Hells Angels. They were more concerned about making sure George knew they were there for him. As the afternoon wore on, the surprise visits didn't stop. George had to pause several times to talk to people who wanted to reassure him that they were standing by his side. There were even a few people he hadn't expected to see. Customers who hadn't been to the shop in years, but still remembered George's fair pricing and top-notch service. By late afternoon, just as George was finishing up a routine tire change, a well-dressed man walked into the shop. He was sharply dressed in a suit, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who was used to business deals and negotiations. The man introduced himself as an investor with connections to several high-end bike clubs and motorcycle enthusiasts. "I heard about what happened yesterday," the man said as he walked up to George, "and I wanted to see if we could talk." George wiped his hands on a rag, still trying to figure out what was happening. "Talk about what?" The man smiled, his expression professional but warm. "Well, I know how hard you've worked to get this shop where it is, and I've heard nothing but good things about your work from people in the community. You've got a reputation that goes beyond this town. I want to offer you a business partnership. I can connect you with clients who would be willing to pay top dollar for your services." George was stunned. This was completely unexpected. He had worked hard to build his shop, but he never imagined he'd be getting an offer like this. "I don't know what to say," George said, still trying to process the turn of events. "You want to partner with me?" "Exactly," the man said, nodding. "You've got the skills, the talent, and the respect of the people here. I want to help you expand that reputation. I know people who will pay a premium for your expertise, and I think together, we could take your shop to the next level." George stood there, his mind racing. This was more than he had ever expected. The Hells Angel had tried to tear him down, but now it seemed that not only had the community rallied behind him, but new opportunities were opening up. It wasn't just about his business. It was about showing that standing up for what's right, even in the face of adversity, could lead to something greater. After a few moments of contemplation, George finally spoke. "All right, let's talk. I don't know what this will look like, but if you're serious, I'm willing to listen." The man smiled, reaching out to shake George's hand. "I knew you'd be interested. Let's make this work." As George shook his hand, he realized something important. The Hell's Angel had thought he could break George, but in reality, he had only strengthened him. The community's support, combined with the new business opportunity, was the beginning of something bigger. And it had all started with a threat that had seemed so daunting. George had learned an important lesson that day. When you stay true to your values and stand up for yourself, even the toughest challenges can open doors you never thought possible. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, George felt hopeful and excited for what was to come. The days following Anthony's firing were tough, filled with a sense of loss and confusion. He had poured his heart and soul into the shop, working long hours, gaining respect for his skills, and building a reputation that meant a lot to him. To have it all taken away because of a single decision felt like a punch to the gut. He had always been proud of his work, but now he wasn't sure where to go next. The idea of finding another job was daunting, and he wasn't sure if he wanted to go back to a place that didn't appreciate him. But then, the unexpected phone call from Jack, the Hells Angels rider, changed everything. It wasn't just about the job offer. It was the recognition of his skill and the understanding that sometimes life could throw curveballs, but they didn't define who you were or what you could become. The invitation to join the Hells Angels crew felt like a strange but promising opportunity, one that might offer a fresh start. After hanging up the phone, Anthony spent a long time thinking about it. He knew that he wasn't just accepting a job offer. He was accepting a new chapter in his life. The idea of working with a group of people who were so different from what he was used to felt intimidating at first. The Hells Angels weren't exactly the kind of people he had imagined working alongside. But as the hours passed, he realized that this was a chance to prove something to himself. It was about finding a place where he could be respected, where his talents were recognized, and where he wouldn't have to fight to be seen as good enough. The following morning, Anthony drove to the address Jack had given him. It was a small building tucked away on the outskirts of town, far from the hustle and bustle of the main streets. When he pulled into the parking lot, his nerves flared up. The building was modest on the outside, but Anthony could already hear the rumble of engines from inside. The air was thick with the unmistakable smell of oil and gasoline, and as he walked through the door, he was met by a group of bikers, rough around the edges, some with tattoos, others with leather jackets adorned with patches. For a moment, Anthony hesitated at the door. He wasn't sure what to expect, but as Jack spotted him and waved him over with a welcoming smile, the tension in his chest eased. Jack was standing next to a huge Harley-Davidson, his bike gleaming under the garage lights. He motioned for Anthony to come closer, and without much more hesitation, Anthony walked toward him. "Glad you could make it," Jack said, giving him a firm handshake. "You've got skills, man. We've got plenty of work for you." Anthony nodded, still taking in the scene. This was different from anything he had ever known. But there was something about the atmosphere that made him feel at ease. These guys weren't as intimidating as he had imagined. They were hard workers and they knew their bikes inside and out. "Just follow my lead," Jack said, handing him a set of tools. "We're not a normal shop, but we get the job done. And we take care of each other here." As the day went on, Anthony worked alongside Jack and the others, fixing bikes and learning how they did things. At first it was a little awkward. He wasn't used to the way the shop was run. There were no formalities, no bosses breathing down their necks. It was a loose, free-flowing environment, but the respect for skill was there. It wasn't about who you were or where you came from. It was about your work and how well you could do it. By the end of the day, Anthony felt a sense of pride that he hadn't felt in a long time. The bikes had been restored and the crew was ready to ride again. Jack slapped him on the back and smiled. "You did good today. You fit right in." Anthony didn't know it yet, but this was just the beginning of a whole new chapter in his life. As the days turned into weeks, Anthony became a regular part of the crew. The bikers respected him for his skills and his work ethic. The more he worked alongside them, the more comfortable he became. There were no expectations about who he should be. There was no pressure to act a certain way. He could simply do what he loved, fix bikes. The other mechanics showed him tricks they had learned over the years, and he shared some of his own tips and techniques. It wasn't long before he became one of the most trusted members of the crew, not just because of his ability to fix any bike, but because of the way he treated the people around him. He didn't judge anyone, and they didn't judge him. They respected each other, and that respect went both ways. But it wasn't just about fixing motorcycles. It was about the bonds they formed while doing it. The Hells Angels crew wasn't just a group of bikers. They were a family. They looked out for each other, and they always had each other's backs no matter what. Anthony started to see that this was more than just a job. This was a place where loyalty and trust mattered most. Despite the growing sense of belonging, Anthony knew that he couldn't completely shake the thoughts of his old job. He had spent years building a reputation at the previous shop, and now, after everything that had happened, he was wondering if the town would still look at him the same way. Would people judge him for working with the Hells Angels? Would his old friends and customers understand? One afternoon, those questions were answered when a familiar face walked into the garage. It was one of the regular customers from his old shop, an older man who had always been one of Anthony's best clients. The man walked into the garage, his eyes scanning the room before landing on Anthony. "Anthony, is that you?" the man asked, a look of surprise on his face. Anthony looked up and smiled. "Yeah, it's me. Things changed a bit. I'm working here now." The man hesitated for a moment, clearly processing the situation. Then he walked over, clapping Anthony on the shoulder. "You always did good work. You still helping people with their bikes?" "Yep," Anthony said, a bit of pride in his voice. "Just a different crowd now, but I'm doing what I love." The man nodded slowly. "I always knew you had the talent. Didn't matter where you worked as long as you kept doing what you were good at." That simple acknowledgement meant more to Anthony than he could express. It reminded him that no matter where life took him, his skills and his work ethic were what mattered most. Over the next few months, Anthony's reputation continued to grow. He became known as one of the best mechanics in town, not just because of his ability to fix anything with an engine, but because of his integrity and his dedication. People came to him from all walks of life, whether they were looking to repair their bikes, upgrade them, or simply keep them running smoothly. And no matter who walked in, Anthony treated them all the same. He gave each customer his full attention, working with them to ensure their bikes were in top condition. Through it all, Jack and the rest of the crew continued to support him, and Anthony started to feel like he had truly found his place. The Hells Angels were far from the image of danger and chaos that society often portrayed them as. They were a group of individuals who valued hard work, loyalty, and a love for the open road. They didn't judge Anthony for where he came from, and they accepted him into their circle without hesitation. As the years went by, Anthony became an integral part of the garage, not just as a mechanic, but as a mentor to the younger members who joined the crew. He taught them everything he knew about working on bikes, but more importantly, he taught them the importance of loyalty, trust, and respect. He showed them that being part of something bigger than yourself meant giving back to others, just as they had done for him. And so, what began as a simple act of kindness, fixing a Hells Angels bike, became the turning point that changed Anthony's life forever. He had gone from being fired at his old job to becoming a respected member of a new community, one that valued his skills and treated him with respect. What happened next was the beginning of a new chapter for him, one filled with endless possibilities, where he could finally do what he loved, surrounded by people who appreciated him for who he was. It wasn't just about fixing bikes. It was about finding a place where Anthony belonged, and learning that sometimes, the unexpected turns in life lead to the most rewarding journeys. David stood in the garage, wiping the sweat off his forehead as he admired the smooth engine of the bike he had just finished working on. It wasn't the first motorcycle he had repaired, but this one felt different. It was as if the entire process had unlocked a new level of pride in his work. The bike was a rare model, an older Harley-Davidson, but it was in bad shape when it was brought in. The engine had been sputtering, the wheels had been out of alignment, and the overall structure had worn down significantly. But now it ran like a dream. David wasn't just proud of the work he had done. He was proud of what this repair symbolized. A few months ago, he'd been fired from the auto repair shop he had worked at for years, and he had felt like his world was crumbling. Being let go after such a long time felt like a betrayal. He was skilled and had done everything by the book. Yet he had found himself out of a job because of a single misunderstanding with a customer. That customer was Blaze, a member of the Hells Angels, a notorious motorcycle club. When David had fixed Blaze's bike, everything had seemed normal. He had no idea the reputation Blaze carried, nor did he realize how much influence the man held in the motorcycle world. After fixing the bike, Blaze had made a complaint about overcharging, even though David knew the price was fair. David had been fired from his job because of it, and it had crushed him. He never expected his life to change because of a flat tire, but somehow it had. For days he searched for new opportunities, but every door seemed to close. The rumors about what had happened spread, and now no one in the industry was willing to give him a chance. His confidence took a hit. He knew his work was good, but nobody seemed willing to take the risk on him after the incident with Blaze. For a while, it seemed like his skills wouldn't be enough to turn things around, but then Blaze appeared at his apartment. David couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the black SUV parked outside his door. A tall, solid figure stepped out. Blaze, the man who had unknowingly set his life on a new path. The biker had come to offer something David never could have imagined, a second chance. Blaze explained that he had miscommunicated about the repairs. In truth, he had appreciated the work David had done on his bike. He admitted that he had been harsh in his feedback to the shop owner. But more than that, Blaze saw something in David. He could tell that David wasn't just another mechanic. He was a true craftsman, someone who could be an asset to any team, even his own. Blaze offered David a job at a motorcycle shop, one that would take him far beyond the small-town garage where he had once worked. The offer came with no strings attached, no expectations other than to do what he loved, work on bikes. At first, David hesitated. He had heard about the Hells Angels and their reputation. The idea of working with a motorcycle club as powerful and influential as theirs made him uneasy. But deep down, David knew that this could be the break he needed. He wasn't sure if it was the right choice, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. When David arrived at the new shop, his eyes widened. The place was a far cry from the small, cramped garage he had worked in. The walls were lined with high-end tools and machinery. The atmosphere was clean, organized, and buzzing with energy. It was clear that this was a serious business, nothing like the disorganized auto repair shop he had been fired from. Blaze, who had promised David the job, had been true to his word. The shop wasn't just about motorcycles. It was about running a tight operation. There were customers who came in from all over, and their bikes needed specialized repairs. David quickly settled into his new role, working alongside skilled technicians who had been in the business for years. They taught him new techniques, and in turn, he shared his knowledge about engines and repairs that he had learned over the years. The collaboration was exactly what David had needed. In time, David's name spread throughout the motorcycle community. His skills became known beyond the Hells Angel circle, and even those who had heard the rumors about him from the old shop began to recognize his work. His reputation as a skilled and honest mechanic slowly grew. He wasn't just fixing motorcycles anymore. He was helping people get back on the road, giving their bikes new life. However, success didn't come without its challenges. While David's work was increasingly praised, there were still some people who looked at him with skepticism. Not everyone in the motorcycle world was ready to accept someone from outside the traditional circles, but David was determined to prove them wrong, and with each repair he built more trust with his customers and co-workers. One day, a man walked into the shop looking for a repair on his bike. He had heard about David from some of his friends and had come to check out the new shop. He was an older man, dressed in simple clothes with no real indication of what he did for a living. He watched quietly as David worked, his eyes scanning the mechanics and the tools, clearly impressed by David's expertise. After the work was done, the man turned to David and struck up a conversation. It wasn't about the repair, though. It was about something else. The man revealed that he was a businessman who owned several companies and had been following David's progress. He had heard how well David had been doing, and he had a proposition for him. David listened carefully as the man spoke about a business venture he had in mind, one that could potentially turn David's skills into a much bigger operation. The man wanted to offer David the opportunity to open his own motorcycle repair business, one with access to financial backing and resources. It was the kind of offer David had always dreamed of but never thought would be possible. At first, David couldn't believe what he was hearing. It sounded too good to be true. He was just a mechanic from a small-town shop, A guy who had been fired for something that wasn't even his fault. How had he gone from that to receiving offers for such a big business venture? The more David thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't just about the money or the business. This was about the chance to build something for himself, to show the world that he wasn't just defined by the setbacks he had faced. He had worked hard for every opportunity that came his way, and now, the world was offering him a chance to take that hard work to new heights. With Blaze's support and the financial backing from the businessman, David opened his own shop, a fully equipped, state-of-the-art motorcycle repair business. The shop quickly gained popularity, not only because of David's skills, but also because of the reputation he had built. People knew he was the real deal, honest, hardworking, and passionate about what he did. David's story became one that inspired others. He had started with nothing but a skill, and through determination and the help of others who believed in him, he had turned his life around. The Hells Angels, the very group that had seemed like an obstacle at first, had played a significant role in his success. They had given him a second chance when no one else would, and through that chance, David had built a new future for himself. Years later, as he stood in his own shop looking over the bustling floor, David couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. He had gone from being fired for something out of his control to owning a business that not only provided for him, but also helped others along the way. What had seemed like a setback had in fact been the beginning of something extraordinary. David now knew that sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and when it does, it's up to you to make the most of it. What once seemed like a simple job fixing motorcycles had transformed into a life full of opportunities, lessons, and people who had helped him along the way. Thing.